a harmonica player, we have a ton of choices for different harmonicas to play. Some are dirt cheap, around $10, and they can go all the way up to multiple hundreds. And you might be wondering, are cheaper harmonicas okay? Or are expensive harmonicas really worth that much money? To answer this question, let's dig into today's topic. We're going to compare cheap harmonicas versus expensive harmonicas so you can determine how much you should personally spend on a harp. So let's first set the stage. There's a couple of tiers of harmonicas, and the lowest tier is going to be harmonicas that are usually made in China, and they're generally about $10 or less, like this small fish harmonica. Hohner has a couple of these. Sometimes you'll be able to buy them in like a 5-pack. So I've done a video comparing a few of these before, and my take is that they're almost never worth it. So this one was $8 on Amazon. And of course, it has thousands of 5-star reviews because people don't know what they're talking about. It's terrible, and I wouldn't even give this to a child unless you hated that child, because yeah, you can play it, but it takes so much effort to get even a single note to play, and there's a ton of air that's leaking through. Now, here's a quick demo. This is the small fish harmonica. It's so bad. It's just really, really bad. And I know how to set up harmonicas, and I've even tweaked the reeds, and it's still awful. So harmonicas at this level, I would generally just skip them. I don't consider them serious instruments. There's only one that might be, which is the Fender Blues Deluxe. This is passable. So as I said, it's passable. There's a reed that is just not working on this harp. It's not stuck. It just is very badly set up. So if you're going to get a harmonica in this price range, Fender Blues Deluxe is, I don't know, passable, but don't do this to yourself unless you just want to have a bad time, okay? The next level up is between $25 and $30. So let's talk about that. Now, there's a couple harmonicas here that you might be interested in. One's the East Top 008K. There's the Kongsheng Mars, the Kongsheng Amazing 20. Some of these are actually pretty good. Like the East Tops, these are perfectly functional. They play pretty well. The only downsides are on build quality for this particular one. Like the edges are really sharp, but they actually play and sound pretty well. So honestly, this is not bad, and this could easily be your main harmonica. It wouldn't be one that I particularly love, but you know, if you want to get a bunch of these to fill up your collection of uncommon keys, I would say go for it. You know, there's 12 keys of harmonicas, and if you want to be flexible, you generally want all 12. So if you have all the main keys, I'd consider getting these to fill up your collection. It's really not that bad. And some of those Kongsheng ones I mentioned are pretty solid too. So the $25 to $30 range is probably the least you're going to want to spend to get an actual functional instrument, but they might not be your favorite. Sometimes they have build quality issues, things like that, but they generally play okay. So yeah, not too bad. The next tier is the standard one, which goes from about $45 to $60. So many harmonicas that real musicians play fall in this category. We're talking about the Special 20, the Marine Band Classic, the Golden Melody, Seidel Session Steel, Lee Oscar, DeBell Noble, Suzuki Manji, and there's so much more. My favorite in this price range is probably the Hohner Rocket. This is at the higher end of that price point, but it just plays so nicely. So harmonicas at this like $50 price point should all be pretty good. Now you can't assume that any harmonica at this price point is always going to play perfectly. Quality control varies, but most of these will work just fine. There are some that you'll like more than others though. Like I don't particularly like Lee Oscars or Seidel Session Steels, but I'm really into some of the Hohners or DeBells. So just understand that you're going to have to try things out at this price point. Just because you're spending $50 doesn't mean you're going to get an amazing harmonica necessarily, but this is a pretty good mix between quality and value. So on these harmonicas, your bends should work pretty well. Your single notes should not be leaky. Generally, the build quality is going to be better on these compared to those cheaper harmonicas that I mentioned at that like $25 price point, but honestly, the difference might not be substantial. The only harmonica that can really overblow at this price point is a JDR Assassin. Most harmonicas aren't set up to be overblown, so you're probably going to need to spend more money, but that is one that you can get at this price point that's actually decent. So the next level up is around $80 to $110. So some examples of these harmonicas are, let's say, the Hohner Crossover or the Seidel 1847. At this level, you're getting harmonicas that may not functionally play better than the previous tier, but they often feel better or have a special feature of some sort. Maybe it's durability, slightly better build quality, or maybe they are set up for overblows, okay? So you have a bunch of different options at this level. So this is a crossover. Let me play this for a second. So if you spend around $90 on a harmonica, you should be happy with it at that level. Now, they don't always function better than that middle tier, but they often feel better. And I think that's really where the difference is. So as far as Hohner's offerings, Marine Band Deluxe, Crossover are really good. They just feel more premium than their standard offerings, right? Like the Marine Band Deluxe has a sealed comb compared to the Marine Band Classic, which does not have a sealed comb and uses nails instead of screws. So sometimes you just have to pay a little bit more money to get a better instrument. The high-end Seidel harmonicas, the 1847 line, those all feel super quality and potentially last longer. And then there's some harmonicas like the Archaea Origin, which is I think $90, and the Harmo Torpedo. And these harmonicas are harps that you should be able to overblow on, and they cost a little bit more money to get that particular setup, even though they might be using cheaper components. So if you're spending this much money, you're doing it because these harmonicas feel good and they sound good, and maybe because they overblow, okay? So all of the other harmonicas at this price range are not reliable for overblows, but that Archaea Origin is pretty decent. So just understand, if you're spending about $90, you should really like the harmonica that you're buying. And then we have the super premium harmonicas. These are harmonicas at like 175 and then plus, which includes the Archaea Signature, this one here, Janbergs, and custom harmonicas. Now, these all feel amazing to play. They generally look good, they feel good, and the reed work is usually the best it's going to be. And if you want to overblow, if you're at that level and you don't want to do the setup yourself, you're probably going to have to spend around $200 to get an instrument that functions in the way that you want to. Now, if you go even further than that, there's custom harmonicas, which are around $200 to $300, and they could be even better than off-the-shelf harmonicas, but they're harder to find. You generally have to buy these from a customizer that has their own website or maybe advertises on Facebook. All right, now that you understand the breakdown of different harmonicas, what should you actually buy? And is it okay to save some money buying a cheaper harp? And is it worth buying those really expensive harmonicas? And the breakdown is this. The really cheap ones, just don't play them. They're pretty much all awful, and I would skip even that Fender Blues Deluxe. Just don't do that to yourself. The harmonicas that are at the $25 range, like your East Tops, your Kongsheng harmonicas, they're actually fine. Honestly, I don't think that they're that much different than harmonicas at that $50 range. The biggest difference is that they come from China and they may cut some corners, or actually not cut some corners, in the fact of the East Tops that they really need to have the corners filed down a little bit to make them more comfortable to play. So those are perfectly fine. And if you want a decent instrument on a budget, then you could spend $25 and get a perfectly functional harmonica. Most harmonicas in that $50-ish range are going to be perfectly fine. Now, you will have your preferences. As an example, I don't love Lee Oscars, but there's some other harmonicas in that price range or even cheaper that I really do enjoy. So you just got to figure that out for yourself. At the $50 level, you should have a very playable harmonica. The sound isn't necessarily going to be better. Harmonica is not one of the things where spending a lot more money is necessarily going to get you a better sound. It might in certain instances, but it is definitely definitely not a universal across the board. So just kind of get that middle level should work for you. If all you want to do is be able to bend, you don't care about overblows, that should be fine. And I think that most of your harmonicas probably will be in that category. As far as the expensive harmonicas, the ones that are around $90, I think are really nice. And the thing is, you're just paying for better build quality. You know, if we're comparing let's say a session steel, which is, you know, it's okay, with a Seidel 1847, you're paying for a much nicer harmonica with the 1847. It just feels much better. The build quality is much higher. It feels like a seriously quality instrument. And so I think it's a good idea to try at least one of these really nice harmonicas out so you can just see what a nicer harmonica feels like. They'll be a little bit more playable. The sound might be a little bit better, but you're really paying for build quality and just feeling. I think the harmonicas that are more expensive, like the crossover, the 1847s, they just feel better to play, and they personally inspire me to pick up my harmonica more. Okay, so I think that's a good thing to keep in mind. You want to be inspired to play, right? And the nice thing about harmonicas, you only really need one decent instrument to do most of your practice on. Now, some people challenge me on this, but I've worked with students and I've seen how people work, and generally most harmonica players have a whole bunch of harmonicas that they never touch unless they're performers, and then they have one or two harmonicas that they play most of the time. And so with that being the case, I think it's justifiable to spend a little bit more money on a nicer harmonica to be one of your main harmonicas. As far as that higher price tier, we're talking like 175 plus. That's really worth it for people who are serious about being able to do overblows, and performers or people who are making their money on harmonica playing. It's not to say that someone who isn't at the professional level won't get a lot out of getting a harmonica like the Arkia Signature or getting a custom harmonica. I just would say that it's not really necessary, because until a very long point into your career as a harmonica player, the bottleneck in your playing is going to be your skills, not your instrument. But at some point you will run into a bottleneck of your instrument not letting you play the things that you want to. This is especially the case when it comes to overblows. And if you want a harmonica that's going to be able to overblow really well, you're going to need to spend a decent amount of money, at least $90 at the cheapest one that I can recommend, which is the Arkia Origin. And then higher from there, we're talking $175 Arkia Signature and custom harmonicas, which are about $200 plus. So if you're spending that much money, you're really doing it because they are, you know, really quality instruments. You like playing an instrument that is really premium, and that you really want that extra few percentage points in playability to let you do some things that might be a struggle on that $50 range, especially when it comes to overblows. So that's the general idea. The nice thing about harmonica, you don't need to spend a lot of money to get a really good and playable instrument, and there are diminishing returns as you spend more money, but for some players, spending a lot more money might be worth it because it'll let you do different things, like being able to overblow, as an example. So I hope that this was helpful. You don't need to spend a ton of money, but if you want to, I think you'll be happy with those harmonicas. And I would say my general suggestion is get one nice harmonica that you're going to do most of your practice on, and then just pick random harmonicas to fill out the rest of your collection. As long as you're spending at least $25, I think you'll be happy. So if you want to see my personal recommendations, click this video to see my top 10, and I'll catch you next time. Peace.